There are moments in life when silence becomes louder than noise, when the absence of attention carries a heavier weight than the most deafening sound, and in those very moments, if we could pause long enough to reflect, we might hear the eternal whisper of God asking us a piercing question. Why are you not paying attention to me? I have something for you. And this question, though soft in tone, carries the gravity of eternity itself because it is not just a question of destruction, but a question of destiny. Not just a question of negligence, but a question of love ignored. Not just a call to listen, but a reminder that the Creator Himself has something prepared, something intended, something divine and uniquely fashioned for your life. And when we begin to reflect on these words, we realize that life itself has been designed as a constant dialogue between heaven and earth. But too often, the earth is so loud, our ambitions so pressing, our schedules so suffocating, our phones so distracting, our worries so endless, that the still small voice of God gets drowned out by the chaos of survival. And in this chaos, we convince ourselves that God is distant, when in reality, He has been speaking all along, waiting patiently, yearning deeply, calling tenderly, asking one simple but eternal question: why are you not paying attention to me, my child, when I have everything you've been searching for, everything you've been crying about, everything you've been secretly longing for hidden in my hands? When God asks this question, it is not the question of a dictator demanding obedience, but of a father longing for intimacy. Not the question of a master demanding service, but of a friend offering guidance. Not the question of a tyrant demanding submission, but of a savior offering life. And yet we treat it as if it is optional, as if ignoring God carries no consequence, as if the delay in our obedience does not delay our blessing, as if time is in our control, when in truth, the breath we take at this very moment is still borrowed from His mercy. Think for a moment about how many times you prayed desperately for an answer and then forgot to wait for the reply. How many times you asked God for a sign but ignored it when it came in the form you least expected. How many times you begged heaven for a miracle, but then got distracted by the noise of the world and missed the moment when the miracle began to unfold right before your eyes, because you were too busy staring at the storm to see the Savior walking on the water. God is saying, why are you not paying attention to me? I have something. And what He has is not small, not fragile, not temporary, but eternal, powerful, life-transforming. But the tragedy of modern life is that we are so immersed in endless scrolling, constant comparisons, financial pressures, and shallow pursuits that the sacred whisper of heaven feels inconvenient. And so we silence it, we ignore it, we postpone it, only to later wonder why our souls feel so restless, why our hearts feel so empty, why our minds feel so tormented. The truth is that God has something for every single one of us. And this something is not vague or random, but specific, intentional, and tailor-made for you. It could be the healing you have begged for in secret tears. It could be the opportunity you thought had already passed you by. It could be the restoration of a relationship you believed was beyond repair. It could be the forgiveness that would release you from the chains of guilt you've carried for years. It could be the strength to finally overcome the addiction that has strangled your potential. It could be the peace in a mind that has been restless for decades. But whatever that something is, it is locked inside the attention we give Him, because attention is the currency of love. And God does not force His gifts on those who will not open their hands to receive. Imagine for a moment how many blessings are waiting in storage because we have not been still enough to notice. How many doors remain unopened because we have not knocked in faith, but instead slammed our fists in frustration. How many breakthroughs have been delayed because our eyes are so fixed on people who betrayed us instead of the God who never abandoned us. And in this reality, God continues to ask in the gentlest but firmest way, why are you not paying attention to me? I have something for you.
And the danger of not paying attention to God is not simply that we miss out on blessings, but that we begin to numb ourselves to His presence altogether, that we confuse delay with denial, that we interpret silence as absence, that we start chasing voices that are not His and promises that are counterfeit, until we end up more broken than before, more lost than before, more exhausted than before, all because we failed to notice that the very thing we needed most was already being whispered by the one who loves us most. But here lies the hope. Even when we ignore Him, even when we delay our response, even when we wander so far into distraction that we can barely remember how to pray, His voice still comes. His question still lingers. His mercy still waits, because God is not asking to shame us, but to awaken us, not to condemn us, but to rescue us, not to punish us, but to invite us back into alignment with His plan. And the moment we decide to listen, the moment we choose to pay attention, everything begins to shift, because awareness of His presence is the starting point of transformation, and listening to His voice is the doorway to destiny. So today, pause for a moment, silence the noise, lay aside the endless scrolling, turn down the volume of fear and worry, and hear Him clearly as He asks, "Why are you not paying attention to me? I have something." And when you respond with humility and faith, you will discover that what He has is not just enough, but more than enough. Not just survival, but abundance. Not just comfort, but calling. Not just provision, but purpose. Because He has always had plans for you. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. But those plans require your attention, your trust, your willingness to step away from the world's distractions and lean into His voice. Let this be the day when you answer the question, when you decide that God will have your attention, when you realize that the breakthrough you are searching for is already waiting on the other side of your surrender, when you embrace the truth that ignoring God only prolongs the storm, but listening to Him brings you safely to the shore. And let it be said that from this moment on, you chose to pay attention, you chose to believe, you chose to trust. And in doing so, you finally received what God has been waiting all along to give you.
And if you think carefully about your life, you will realize that every season of hardship, every unanswered prayer, every tear that fell silently on your pillow at night, every betrayal you endured without anyone to comfort you, was not ignored by God, but recorded, not dismissed by heaven, but remembered. And in those very moments when you thought no one cared, God was whispering the same question He is asking you today. Why are you not paying attention to me? I have something for you. Because He knew that if you would only lift your eyes from your pain and fix them on His presence, you would see that even in the darkest storm there was light guiding you. Even in the fiercest battle there was strength sustaining you. Even in the deepest confusion there was wisdom waiting for you. But you missed it because you were too focused on the noise instead of the voice. We must understand that attention is not simply about listening with our ears, but about aligning our hearts. That paying attention to God means surrendering the obsession with our own timeline and opening ourselves to His perfect timing. Because the truth is that God never delays without purpose. God never remains silent without reason. God never closes a door unless He is preparing a greater one to open. But we live in such a culture of urgency and impatience that when heaven does not move according to our schedule, we assume that heaven has abandoned us, when in fact God is quietly aligning things in ways that will not just meet our expectations, but exceed them in ways we could not even imagine. Think of how many miracles in Scripture came not because people were powerful or influential, but because they paid attention. Moses noticed a burning bush and turned aside to see. Samuel heard a voice in the night and said, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." Elijah recognized the whisper of God not in the earthquake or the fire, but in the stillness. Mary listened to an angel's announcement and believed even though it defied logic. And the disciples dropped their nets and followed Jesus simply because they paid attention to the call. And if these people had ignored the voice, if they had dismissed the interruption, if they had been too distracted by their own plans, history would have taken a different turn. and their destinies would have been delayed or even lost, which is exactly why God's question echoes so urgently in your life today. Why are you not paying attention to me? I have something for you. Is not a casual suggestion, but a divine summons. It is heaven's reminder that your life is not random, that your days are not meaningless, that the emptiness you feel is not supposed to be permanent, that the obstacles you face are not the final chapter. And when you finally silence the distractions and pay attention to the voice of God, you will realize that He has been orchestrating the details of your life from the very beginning, weaving pain into purpose, loss into lessons, and weakness into strength, so that the person you are becoming is far greater than the person you thought you would be. But here is the warning that cannot be ignored. If we continue to live without paying attention, if we continue to drown ourselves in temporary pleasures and shallow distractions, if we continue to value the opinions of people more than the whispers of God, then we will continue to wander in circles, repeating cycles of pain, chasing opportunities that vanish as quickly as they appear, and wondering why our hearts are never satisfied. Because true fulfillment does not come from more possessions or more recognition, but from aligning our souls with the one who created them. And until we give Him our attention, until we give Him our focus, until we give Him our yes, we will remain restless and unfulfilled. And so, beloved child of God, as you read these words, let them not just be words on a screen, but a divine interruption in your day. A sacred pause where heaven itself leans close to your spirit and whispers again, "Why are you not paying attention to me? I have something for you." And may you finally realize that what He has for you is not just survival, but life in abundance. Not just answers, but peace that surpasses understanding. Not just opportunities, but doors that no man can shut. Not just healing, but wholeness. Not just provision, but overflowing blessing. Because the God who spoke galaxies into existence is still speaking into your life, waiting for your attention, longing for your trust, desiring your love, and offering you something that the world could never give and that the world could never take away.
And perhaps the greatest tragedy of our time is not that people no longer believe in God, for deep down every heart still longs for the eternal, but that so many have grown numb, distracted, and spiritually deaf, unable to hear the quiet and persistent knocking at the door of their souls where God is patiently waiting, whispering again and again, "Why are you not paying attention to me? I have something for you." Yet they scroll through endless screens, chase fleeting pleasures, drown themselves in busyness, and silence the voice that could transform their entire existence, trading eternal treasures for temporary noise. It is heartbreaking to realize that the same God who designed the stars, who paints every sunrise, who commands oceans to stop at their shores, is the same God who bends down to listen to your prayers, who counts your tears, who numbers the very hairs on your head, and who is right now asking for your attention because He knows that what He has for you is not only far better than what you're chasing, but also the only thing that will ever satisfy the emptiness inside. And yet we so often refuse to lift our eyes, so often refuse to pause, so often refuse to surrender because we fear losing control, when in truth we are already lost without Him. Do you not see that the restlessness in your soul, the endless search for validation, the disappointment when people fail you, the anxiety that keeps you awake at night, the regrets that haunt your memories, are not random feelings, but alarms from heaven designed to wake you up, to shake you from the illusion that life without God can ever bring peace, to remind you that the missing piece of your puzzle is not more success, not more money, not more relationships, but the living presence of God, who alone can heal the brokenness you keep hiding behind a smile, who alone can give you the strength to rise when life knocks you down, who alone can give meaning to your suffering and hope to your tomorrow. And if you think that God has been silent, let me remind you that silence does not mean absence, for God often speaks in ways we are too hurried to notice. In the quiet conviction of your conscience when you're about to make the wrong choice. In the sudden peace you feel when you pray, even though nothing in your circumstances has changed. in the opportunities that open when others shut you out, in the strangers who encourage you when you're ready to give up, and even in the disappointments that force you to let go of what you thought was best for you, so that He can give you something far greater than you imagined. Because His silence is often a strategy, His delays are often protection, and His whispers are often more powerful than thunder. So the real question is not whether God is speaking, but whether you are listening. Not whether God has something for you, but whether you are willing to pay attention long enough to receive it. Because the truth is that God's blessings are often hidden in obedience. His miracles are often disguised as inconveniences, and His breakthroughs are often found in the very places we are unwilling to go. Which is why the difference between an ordinary life and a life overflowing with purpose is not how much talent you have or how much knowledge you gain, but how willing you are to pause, to listen, and to respond when God says, "I have something for you."
And when we look back at the stories written in the scriptures, we cannot help but notice that the greatest downfalls did not come simply because of weakness or lack of ability, but because people failed to pay attention to God, as in the case of Jonah, who heard God's call to go to Nineveh, yet chose to run in the opposite direction, thinking he could outrun the voice of heaven, only to discover that no ship, no storm, no depth of the sea could silence the question God kept asking. Why are you not paying attention to me? I have something for you. And it was only when Jonah surrendered, only when he finally listened, that he stepped into the mission he was born to fulfill. And in the wilderness, we see the nation of Israel wandering for 40 years, not because God was absent, not because His promises were weak, but because they were too distracted by their own fears, too focused on the giants in the land, too obsessed with the comfort of Egypt they had left behind. And as a result, a whole generation missed out on the inheritance waiting for them, which stands as a sobering warning for us today, because how many of us are wandering in circles, repeating the same mistakes, facing the same battles, praying the same prayers with no breakthrough? Not because God has forgotten us, but because we have refused to pay attention to His instructions and His timing. And think of Martha, busy in the kitchen, stressed and worried about many tasks, while her sister Mary simply sat at the feet of Jesus, soaking in every word. And when Martha complained, Jesus gently corrected her, saying that Mary had chosen the better part, because paying attention to Him was worth more than all the frantic activity. Which reminds us that in our modern lives filled with endless responsibilities, deadlines, notifications, and noise, we may be so consumed with doing for God that we forget to be with God, so caught up in serving that we neglect the voice of the one we claim to serve. And in doing so, we risk missing the very thing He is trying to give us. And in your own life, if you are honest, you can trace moments where you felt an inner tug, where something told you to wait, to pause, to forgive, to let go, to trust. But you ignored it because it was inconvenient, because it required humility, because it meant giving up control. And later, you realized that the consequences of ignoring that whisper were heavier than the cost of obedience would have been. And in those moments, God's question echoes again, "Why are you not paying attention to me? I have something for you." And it is not condemnation, but compassion, not accusation, but invitation. Because His desire is not to punish you for missing it, but to draw you back into alignment with His will so you can still walk into what He has prepared. And perhaps one of the deepest truths is that God will keep asking this question until you finally respond, because He is too loving to give up on you, too patient to walk away, too committed to your destiny to leave you in your distractions. Which means that even if you have ignored Him for years, even if you have drowned His voice under the noise of your ambitions and failures, even if you have hardened your heart with disappointment, today He still whispers. Today He still calls. Today He still says, "Why are you not paying attention to me? I have something for you." And if you pause right now, If you breathe and listen, you will sense that He has been with you all along, waiting for this very moment to capture your attention again.